So we're going to go live on Facebook, and we'll get started in just a couple of minutes.
Okay, great.
Good morning, everybody. We're broadcasting on the Bayit's Facebook Live page as well as on the Zoom this morning. And welcome to all who are joining us. We're going to get started in just a minute or a minute and a half or so. So please bear with us. All right, we have a nice group of people joining. I can already see the numbers popping up as the number of participants are joining us. And we'll get started in just a few seconds, okay? I have my Donald Trump coffee cup, so we're all ready to get started. All right, Shavua Tov, everyone. Gute Woche, and it's wonderful to join with you on a wintry Sunday morning, together with our special guests, David and Fran Woolf, who are longtime members of the Toronto Jewish community. Only recently, within the last, 3 years? How many years is it now that you're in Thornhill?
5 to 6.
5 years, wow. Oh, wow, okay, time flies.
Time flies when you're having
Well,
fun.
I've only been in Thornhill for the last 5+ years, but have been really integral members of the Toronto Jewish community for much longer than that. I'm just going to read you a short description of David and Fran, so that you get just a very, very small idea. Fran and David both grew up in downtown Toronto. David was one of the early day heads of NCSY in Canada. David was one of the founders of Jerusalem Star, which I'm going to talk a little bit about, which produced music with Shlomo Carlebach, Yehuda, and many others. Fran has a reputation as an amazing cook and a foodie. She taught cooking at Ulpana and for the COR, and is regularly consulted by friends and foodies for cooking tips, recipes, etc. And finally, Fran and David are avid travelers, and they keep a blog of all their travels documented on travelkosherwithus.blogspot.ca, where they describe their experiences in the Jewish communities wherever they go. So it's wonderful to have you with us this morning, Fran and David. Welcome.
Morning.
And really, where I'd like to start is tell us a little bit about the history of Jewish Toronto, and reminisce with us a little bit about your involvement in the growth of NCSY in Toronto. What was life like? Probably Toronto is one of the first communities that had NCSY. Tell us a little bit about your life growing up and what Toronto was like back in the day.
To go 3 years before we came to Toronto to understand how NCSY got our interest.
But he wants.
Yeah, we were.
So we grew up in Toronto. My parents moved here from England in 1950. Fran's parents moved here from Bergen-Belsen, where she was born in 1948. And Fran grew up near Bloor and Dovercourt, and I grew up at Harvard and Bathurst. So that's south of Bloor, between Bloor and College. The interesting thing is that in those days, we probably knew 95% of the Orthodox community just from regular
it was so small.
involvement. The community was small. And I was thinking the other day that while there's strength in numbers, there's also less unity in numbers, because communities were more unified back then, simply because you needed each other. So I remember growing up and going for Simchas Torah. We davened in the Aguda, which was at 608 Bathurst Street, Bathurst, south of Harvard. And we would go for Simchas Torah, and after we finished dancing, we would walk a block away to Mizrahi to continue the dancing. So it was like Aguda and Mizrahi together dancing on Simchas Torah. And it was that kind of a community, very small. The Eruv went up to Bloor, so we could carry on the south side of Bloor, but not on the north side of Bloor. It went down the middle of Bloor Street. So the community was extremely small. And in 1956, my parents moved up to Bathurst Manor, Pioneers. There was a very small shul there. And
Was that the Beth Jacob?
No, this was way before the Beth Jacob. We davened in what is now the BBYO house on Hove Street, Hove and Shepherd. There was a little shack there, and Yeshiva University sent up a rabbi to help us, a student rabbi, for a year at a time. So we had like 2 or 3 different rabbis over a 3-year period, as Jews were beginning to move into that area. And that shul eventually became the Beth Emeth, the conservative shul, because there was a vote after a period of time, and the majority of the people voted to turn it conservative. And we actually owned that land. My father was involved in going down to the OU to see what they could do about it. And they were told, keep quiet, don't make a fuss, don't make a machlokas, let it pass. And so we started walking to Clanton Park from there, which was a long walk. And there was nothing north of Shepherd. I mean, it was wilderness.
What you're saying, this is a fascinating piece of Jewish history. The attitude was, and is this in the 60s that this happened, so that it transferred
earlier.
It's in the 50s.
It changes from an Orthodox shul to a conservative shul, and the OU's official policy to you was,
I don't know if it was official policy. It was a group of people from the shul went down. There was a small number of Orthodox people who basically founded the shul and maintained the shul. But I remember as a kid, 10 years old, being sent out by the people in the shul to go knock on neighbors' doors to see if we can get a minyan, because we had 8 people and we were missing 2 people, and you'd call and somebody would come over and help you make a minyan. But there were very few from people in that area.
So the attitude was back then, in other words, just to illustrate the difference between the Orthodox world today, which is tremendously strong and vital, and what Orthodoxy was like back in the 50s. The attitude was almost like defeatist. You're not going to win this battle. You might as well just give up. The conservative are taking over North American Jewry. You might as well just let it happen. Whereas today, no one would imagine that. It's fascinating how we've evolved. No, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I agree. And Fran's parents moved up what year?
5 years before we were married, so
63.
63.
They moved up to Joycey and Bathurst and Wilson. And my father-in-law davened at the Chever Shas. He was one of the mainstays of that shul until he died. And then we got married in 68, and we decided, we had a crazy idea that we were actually going to fund ourselves through school rather than rely on our parents. And so we
decided, we were very young when we got married. So we decided that if we were old enough to get married, we're old enough to take on the responsibilities.
So we took a job in Windsor, where I went to University of Windsor, got my MBA. Fran had a teacher's degree from the Toronto Teachers College, and
I taught in the public school. And then at night we both taught Cheder.
We taught at the Shar Shamayim Hebrew School for 3 years.
And then we started a day school there, which lasted about a year or 2 till after we left.
Yeah. So, and then we came back to Toronto in 1971, and we moved into the B'nai Torah area. Basically,
have you run into any of your former students from Windsor?
Oh yes.
when we were moving 6 years ago, So we were cleaning out old files and downsizing. And I came across an album of pictures of kids who we had taught. And I said, oh, I remember her name, or I remember his name. And I Googled them, and became Facebook friends with about, I don't know, 20 or 30 kids who we had taught.
And we got together with some of them in Israel when we were there.
And here.
And here.
Yeah. And
Oh,
the
that's very
amazing thing was that they were all now grandparents. They were kids when we taught. I mean, they weren't much younger than us. They were 12, 13, and we were 20, 21. So, but we were the old people and they were the youngsters. And we were surprised that I think every one of them came from a non-religious home. There are a number of them who are Orthodox, a number of them who Haredi, and most of them are very connected Jewishly, which was very, very surprising and very, very encouraging, actually. And that's really where we ended up getting started with NCSY, because while we were teaching there, we were the first teachers that they had in that school for many years who were under the age of 50. So, in fact, we got criticized by the Canadian Jewish Congress had, a small communities chairman who would come around and inspect all the little schools in the small towns. And we got criticized because when he showed up to inspect one day, I was out playing baseball with the kids. And how could you do that? Like, teachers don't do that.
It's parsonage, yeah.
Parsonage, yeah.
And every Shabbos we had 3 kids to come for Friday night till Motzei Shabbos, 3 girls or 3 boys, the whole 3 years that we were there.
Which you
So we
couldn't
got
do today.
very connected to them.
Which you couldn't do today.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, one girl refused to come. And we couldn't understand why, because all of her friends were coming. And we finally said to her, Fran finally said to her, like, why don't you want to go? And she said, well, I'll have to hold it in all Shabbos.
I can't cut
You're not allowed to tear
paper.
toilet paper, you taught us. so we, I mean, the classic one was the first week that I was teaching, I asked the kids, how many people know about Shabbos and about not cooking on Shabbos? So one little girl stuck her hand up and she says, oh, we don't cook on Shabbos. So I said, why don't you tell the school what we do? Tell the class. And she says, every Friday night we send out to Kentucky Fried Chicken. So
that's when we learn not to ask questions that we don't know what the answer will be.
Exactly.
she's now Haredi living in Yerushalayim.
Anyone who's lived in a small community has a completely different perspective on world Jewry, on reaching out to another Jew who's a brother or sister. I think I recommend it for everyone. Every young couple should spend the first couple of years of their lives together living in a small Jewish community. Anyway, so you're there in Windsor for how many years?
So during the time that we were in Windsor, I was looking around for creative things to do with
for the graduating class.
And I had heard about this organization called NCSY, which I'd never heard of before. And somebody said, well, they're going to have a big Shabbaton in Cleveland at the Taylor Road Synagogue. And it was a quad regional, which 4 different regions together, 500 kids for a Shabbos at this shul. And I said, gee, maybe I'll take a group of kids. And then I floated the idea to the parents and took about 15 kids for Shabbos and came back like completely blown away. That, wow, these were all...
walked in the door, he says, Fran, we're starting NCSY when we moved to Toronto.
Yeah, so it was like an amazing experience. I'd never heard of it. NCSY had started before that in Chicago, and then Rabbi Stolper spread it around and began, there were regions, and it was a functioning organization. Rabbi Stolper was the national director, right? Pinchas Stolper. And there was very little in Canada. There was a beginning of something called YUSY, Yeshiva University Student Youth, which was the precursor. And I think that started in Rabbi Green Shul in Hamilton. And
okay. So this is in what year that NCSY gets started in
71 that we moved
71 here. We moved back. There was a fledgling NCSY program. And we really didn't get involved in 71, but in 72, I got a phone call from an old friend of mine who was the regional director in Florida. and was just appointed as the Associate National Director of NCSY, and his name was Rabbi Baruch Tau. And we had grown up together in Toronto and knew each other well. And he said, it's kind of embarrassing for me to become the Associate National Director of NCSY when there's no real NCSY presence in Toronto. And how about if you get involved? And I, together with Hy Burgell and Nathan Elzaz, we went and we took a loan from the bank to pay some debts that had already been incurred, and slowly began to build up, put a board together and began to build up NCSY here.
That's,
So
and who did you bring out as your professional? Who was the
For the
first?
first couple of years.
So I was the professional for 2 years as a volunteer. We had a fellow by the name of Rabbi Jimmy Wasser out of Buffalo for a number of years. We had a number of full-time and part-time. And I guess my biggest bracha was that for the last long period of time, I had Rabbi Nussin Westrach, Rabbi Dr. Nussin Westrach, and Glenn Black, Rabbi Glenn Black. So, I mean, you couldn't get two better professionals than those two.
I just want to pipe in with one thing that's really cute.
I have a suspicion, by the way, that I think one of the Westrites is on the call today. I haven't seen Rabbi Black yet, but I definitely saw one of the Westrites. So we welcome them to this.
I actually flew down to St. Louis to interview Rabbi Nussin Westrach, who was the regional director there. And
Brought him up here.
came back and I said, yeah, we're going with him.
The interesting thing is that the person who was in front before we took over NCSY had twin boys. When David took over NCSY,
We had
years
twin boys.
later, we had twin boys. When Nussin came, he had twin boys. When we were interviewing Henny and Glenn, I said, I just want to tell you, there's a caveat that you have to consider before you take on the position. It comes with probably having twin boys.
And they did.
And lo and behold, there you go.
It's like a
Now, let me just ask you, looking at the trajectory of NCSY over the years, it really started as, I mean, it's the letters NCSY stand for National Conference of Synagogue Youth, right? And it was originally meant as a synagogue organization, sort of like a service organization for synagogues who were OU synagogues, where there was a recognition that a significant percentage of the kids that were members at Orthodox shuls were not themselves Shomer Shabbos. And NCSY was a way of endearing Yiddishkeit to these kids who were coming from families who may or may not be that religious. And then there was a period of time when Orthodox synagogues became predominantly synagogues for Orthodox Jews, Shomer Shabbos Jews. And NCSY had to evolve with that as well. And then eventually it made a decision that even though it's still called NCSY, like Kentucky Fried Chicken is still KFC, but at the same time, its business model changed as Orthodox synagogues changed. Do you want to reflect on that a little bit?
Yeah, so over the years, we saw many of the NCSY regions change into service to already committed Jewish families rather than unaffiliated Jewish families. And we always had the principle here in this region that we were not going to do that. In other words, we were not welcoming yeshiva kids. We felt that our mandate is to reach out to public school, high school kids.
And the kids that came from Orthodox homes were the Madrichot and Madrichim, not the lay kids.
Right, and we stuck to that principle, and we do till this day.
Well, let me,
like New Jersey, for instance, is primarily yeshiva high school kids.
Right.
So it's a totally different perspective.
Mandate.
And it also has evolved from a synagogue based to now outside of synagogue.
Right. And that's the key to the NCSY's continued success. When I was growing up, we used to call NCSY the Para Aduma, the red heifer, because they said the joke was that it purified the impure, but it made impure those who were pure, because kids who came from Shomer Shabbos homes, who went to NCSY events, tended to be exposed to things that they normally wouldn't be exposed to. And kids who came from public school and non-observant homes, they were elevated in their frumkeit. But I thought that, I always, looking back on that, it's really an unfortunate joke, because the thing that we're missing today is the ability for our kids who grew up in very insular Orthodox communities to really see the opportunity that we have to have an influence on non-Orthodox families, non-Orthodox kids. But at the same time, it's a double-edged sword, because you want to protect your children until they're capable of understanding Yiddishkeit on their own.
It's a very fine line. I mean,
Our thinking was that the Orthodox kids had, B'nai Akiva had, Pirkei had other organizations to go to. And so this was specifically for kids who were not from backgrounds. And they would handpick the kids who were going to be Madrichim and Madrichot, so they shouldn't fall into the paraduma.
Right. All right. So,
but one of the things that really propelled NCSY here was many years ago, we started this thing called the Free Torah High School. One of the jokes was that one of the rabbis in town used to call it the Torah Free High School. But we started something called Free Torah High. And it was, the idea was we would go ahead and we would have programs as it moved from synagogue. We had programs where people would actually come and do courses in Yiddishkeit at NCSY.
So I just want to interrupt you for a second. Sarah Westreich just popped her head up on the video, and we just wanted to say hi.
Hi, Sarah.
Before I turn off the video, Sarah, just thank you, and Nussin for your service to NCSY.
Oh, it was our pleasure. And the best part, of course, was meeting Fran and David, who've become such good friends. Here's Nussin.
I
love these guys.
All right, thank you for joining us today, and maybe we'll get you on a future discussion interview.
We're not nearly as interesting as the Wolves.
Oh my God.
You've got to get into you have to get into their travel. I hope you.
We will. That's we're going to get to that shortly. All right.
Okay,
Great
but
to see you guys. Take
I
care.
want to echo what you said, Rabbi, about young people going to communities, small communities. The NCSY years were the most fabulous years of our lives for ourselves and for our children. We had such a good time doing that work, and we thank Fran and David for that opportunity.
Amazing, and thank you. And I'm sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure your children were enriched by the experience, probably more than you were.
They loved it. They grew up, hanging out at Shabbaton. Some of our kids are now actively involved as board members of NCSY in their respective communities. So it continues.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. Thank you.
Bye, David. Bye, Fran.
Bye, guys.
So you have a couple of there was someone else popped up called the David and Fran fan club popped up a moment ago. We're not sure if those were family members, but I'm sure they'll deny it. Anyway, listen. So you, after passing the reins onto the professionals like the Westreichs and the Blacks, you put NCSY on a very upward trajectory to its tremendous success today, and it continues in its successful mode today, due to the very, very capable professionals that are running it. And so where does that leave the two of you? Where did your life go after NCSY?
We retired.
You chef Mathis.
I mean, I was together with Zale Newman. We were co-chairman for, 35 years, 40 years. And we gave it up, and Larry Zeifman became the chairman, and very capable hands, and it continues. It's grown exponentially, mainly because of Torah High. Torah High, which was an offshoot and a small part of the program, became a major part of the program once people realized that you could actually go to the Board of Education, to the ministry, and say, can I verify that this is a valid course for a high school credit? And all of a sudden you could take a trip to Israel for the summer and take something called Shakespeare in Jerusalem as a course, as a high school course, and complete it. And with exams and monitored by the province, and come back with a credit, high school credit. And all of a sudden, many high school kids who never thought of joining NCSY said, wow, I can go there and get some high school credits by attending a Jewish organization.
It's really amazing
Genius idea, genius idea.
it's amazing to consider how many lives NCSY has impacted over the years, and how many people today are the children and grandchildren of the people who started off in NCSY and now have hundreds and thousands of children and grandchildren who are from today, who are observing Yiddishkeit and upholding the mitzvahs. And it's mind-boggling. I want to move on.
I just want to tell you, one of the interesting things was that the former principal of Chat, Gary Diamond, was involved with us in advising us how to work with the ministry and to get credit and to do it legally and professionally, and it's not a sham, it's a real thing where the ministry comes and actually audits the programs, and then it was the marketing genius of Glenn, Rabbi Black, who said, I'm going to advertise this at Cineplex, so what? Yeah. 10 minutes before you watch the movie, all of a sudden, and we were sitting once at a movie and 3 kids in front of us. And as the ad popped up on the screen, one guy says, I go to NCSY, I go to Torah High. I said, wow. So that was.
And I believe Gary Diamond is on the call today. So thank you, Gary, for joining us and for your service. And also welcome to Thornhill. If you haven't, I understand you're coming up soon also. That's where all great people eventually end up, is Thornhill. Anyway, let's go on. I want to talk a little bit about, there's so many other facets of your life. I want to talk about your involvement with Jewish music. Tell us a little bit about because Toronto is traditionally a sort of one of the capitals of Jewish music for the Jewish world. So tell us about your involvement with that, David and Fran.
So I guess it also ties back to NCSY. Zale and I, we had to raise money to run NCSY, and we were working on a shoestring. And in those days, the OU was not supporting the regions. So you went out to a region, and you were now the regional director. You had to raise your own money to run the region. Today, it's much, much more organized, and the OU gives tremendous support to all the regions right across North America and South America. But in those days, you had to somehow find the money. So what we came up with was the idea of running a Jewish music festival around Hanukkah time. And we started, Zale and I started a Jewish music festival. The first one was, I don't even remember what year, but probably in the early 70s, we had a music festival featuring Joe Amar and the Rayim Duo.
I wonder how many know that
people
name
probably
today.
don't even know those names.
I remember Joe Amar and the Rayim Duo. I mean, they did the circuit. They came to LA just like they came to Toronto. Yeah. And my dad who was involved in the music business, they always used to turn to him to help book these people because he knew how to deal with managers and booking agents and stuff like that.
And we did it in the Ryerson Theater downtown with 500 seats, and we had probably 150 sponsors at $25 a seat or something like that. And one year, after we did a number of years of these, and it was getting sort of monotonous because it was Mordechai Ben David, Miami Boys Choir, Avram Fried, and then Mordechai Ben David and Miami Boys Choir, and every 3 years you sort of recycled. And one year Zale and I said, we got to come up with something new. So we said, why don't we do a nostalgia concert? And who will we get? We'll get Shlomo Carlebach, and we'll get the Noam Singers. I don't know if you remember that name. Noam Singers were at the same time as the Rabbi's Sons out of YU. Mm-hmm. And the Noam Singers were 3 rabbis in different towns. They hadn't sung together in 15 years. And we called them up and said, how would you like to do a reunion concert? And they said, okay, we'll do it. This was 1986 and 1987. And
wasn't Shlomo Carlebach living in Toronto at some point?
Yeah, but Shlomo Carlebach was, when we called him up and we said, we'd like you to perform for us. He said, brothers, you saved my life. And I said, what do you mean? And he says, nobody in the Frum community wants to talk to me anymore. He was almost persona non grata. He had been singing for the Chavurah movement and the conservative reform movement. And he really wasn't, his music was popular, but he wasn't popular. And we said to him, no, we want to do a concert with you. And we want you to come. And we said, not only that,
That was the
but
67.
Soviet Jewry, it was 1987.
Oh, that was.
And we said, Soviet Jewry is a big thing right now. What we want to do is we want to advertise this as a concert featuring you and the Noam singers. But after the concert's over, for the sponsors, we're going to go to B'nai Torah and we're going to record live a record for the Jews of Russia, and we're going to smuggle it into Russia. And he said, wow, you know, what a great idea. So we had actually a truck sitting outside of B'nai Torah with all the music studio in a truck. And it was all wired into the hall. And Shlomo did a 1.5 hour concert, Kumsitz, for the Jews of Russia. And whenever he spoke in English, we dubbed it into Russian. And then we produced 2 products. One product was a NCSY product called Live for the Jews of Russia, which made money for NCSY. And the other product was a no-name product, which had Beethoven's Fifth for the first 8 minutes. And the rest of it was the concert with the dub parts in Russian with a nondescript cover. And we smugged that into Russia because if they stopped you.
For the Mozart at the beginning, or Beethoven at the beginning, was they wanted to make sure that what we were bringing in was legal. So they would put it on a tape. They heard the first minute or 2 of and they said, okay, fine. And they packed it and we all walked in with it.
And we went back to Russia 2 years later with Shlomo. And we saw Jews who knew that music. And they said they got this music from tapes that were smuggled into the country. And
so Shlomo traveled with you to the former USSR.
We went with an OU mission to Russia in 1989, right at the time of Perestroika, to finish off writing a Sefer Torah, which ended up in the city of Kharkov, where the OU had a program. And we wrote the Sefer Torah in Moscow, Leningrad, and Kiev. And it was advertised as come and write a Sefer Torah, even though there was still communism. The curtain hadn't gone down. And we had, I think in Leningrad, we had 8,000 people in a hockey arena who showed up, you know, with makeshift kinds of kippahs on. And Shlomo was on stage and the Sofer was on stage and the Sefer Torah, and they were dancing with the Sefer Torah. For some people, it was the first time they saw a Sefer Torah in their life. I remember one thing that happened in the Moscow shul was Shlomo got up on Shabbos morning and he said, you're all invited. Like there were 200 people who showed up to shul Shabbos morning just to see Shlomo. And he got up and he says, you're all invited for Shabbos Shidduch. And we looked at him and we said,
we didn't have food.
What are you going to give them? So he says, whatever you have, cut it into small pieces. And we're giving our food out to these people because they're going to come to shul. And 500 people showed up for Shabbos Shidduch. Wow. And he sat on the bima and he sang for 2 hours. It was like magical.
We also smuggled in Sidurim that time too, saying that each person took 3 Sidurim, saying that one was for Shabbos, one Mincha, and one for Marav, and they were personal. They're not to sell or to give away. So they let us in with that, and then we gave those away.
Yeah. So at that point in time, we were connected to Shlomo in some way, and Zale and I said, why don't we go into business as a hobby, the 2 of us. We were both working full-time, and we're going to start a company called Jerusalem Star. And we approached Shlomo with the idea, and we said, we'd like to do a history of all Shlomo music with him. And he said, okay, you got it. And we produced in 3 days in a studio in New York, at Steve Bill's studio in New Jersey. We produced 3 double albums in 3 days. So Shlomo sang like 75 songs. And it was the first time in his life that he had sang with a laid down track. So we laid down piano and guitar, and Shlomo had to sing. He said, I can't do this. He was free flowing. He would sing and then all of a sudden he'd go into a story. We said, no, you have to sing the song as we laid it down in the track. And then we added the orchestra behind it after, and we produced 4 records. One was called The Best of the 60s, The Best of the 70s, The Best of the 80s, and The Rest of the Best. And they were double album cassettes where they had 1 album of only songs and 1 album of stories. So we said, we don't want you to mix the stories and the songs. Tell the stories, tell the song, sing the songs. And that was an excellent start to our musical career.
I remember I had a couple of those albums. I don't remember whether I had them on cassette or CD. Did they go to CD as well?
They went to CD, and then we actually did some unplugged. We produced them in various different, we took all the Shabbos songs and created something called Shabbos with Shlomo. And then at the end of the 3 days, which is an interesting side point, Shlomo said, I want to do a record which will be nusach for Friday night. And Zeo and I both said to him, it'll never sell. Because at that point in time, there was his shul on the Upper West Side, and there was the Chaver at the Moshav. And those were the only 2 Shlomo Minyanim for Friday night. Nobody was singing Shlomo Nusach on Friday night. So he said, no, I insist. So he said, okay. And he went ahead and we recorded that with him, and it was terrible. He had sung, he wasn't young, and he had sung for 3 straight days. His voice was crackly, and we listened to it and we said, we're not releasing it. Put it on the shelf.
Then Achrei Mos Kedoshim.
Yeah, after he passed away, we went back and listened to it, and we said, you know what, if we enhance this a little bit digitally, and if we throw in a choir here, and if we do a little bit of support here and change this and cut this,
Orchestra.
we'll have a nice product. And that became Shabbos in Shemayim, which became the best-selling tape we ever did, which became tape, CD.
I have Shabbos in Shemayim. I think most people have it.
Yeah, and that was the first Nusach tape of Shlomo, which we didn't want to do, and he insisted.
So does your record company still exist, or
we folded it last year?
Really, last year?
Simply because, first of all, records and tapes, there's no money in it anymore. And it's very expensive. It's become more expensive to produce a record.
Did you sell the catalog to another company?
We sold it to Aderet, which was distribution. It was our distributor for many, many years.
Sure.
Mendy Werdiger. And
you have to give Rabbi Karovkin the tape of the one that never sold. That is one of the best tapes.
We produced a tape called The Kornfelds, which was Moti Kornfeld.
Beautiful, you'll love it.
Zale had a band called the oh God, I'm forgetting the name. But Zale had a band during the Yom Kippur War in Israel, and one of the members of the band was Moti Kornfeld. And on his record that they produced was Shmarkolenu, very good. Thank you.
Shmarkolenu. Okay.
Shmarkolenu. And Al Hanisim was on there. Al Hanisim v'al Hapurkan. That was and basically Moti Kornfeld, many, many years later, had 3 sons who also had beautiful voices. And we produced a record with him, which was magnificent, and it never sold.
The way records sell is if the singers go public, go on stage, travel.
Yeah, you have to do concerts. Otherwise, I mean, that was in the old days. Today, it's a little bit different, but it's still very dependent upon live performance.
So they decided to do the record. But at the end, they refused to go on a circuit because they were from the Haredi camp, and they were afraid for shidduchim for their kids.
Yeah.
But we'll give you a tape. It's beautiful.
But it's fantastic.
You'll love it.
All right, great. I hope you have a CD, because I'm not sure if my tape recorder still works.
I'll send you an MP3.
An MP3. Thank you. All right, and so we could go on for hours talking about the world of Jewish music and talking about its evolution. Just maybe tell me, what do you think is the difference between the music, Shlomo's music, and the music of your time versus modern Jewish music? Do you want to just reflect on that for a moment?
It's singable. It's very singable.
What?
It's singable. It's very simple.
Are you talking about today or
Shlomo's?
Shlomo's music is very singable.
Yeah.
And also, I think the vocals were louder, and you could hear the words. Where today, the background music is what's louder, and the words sort of get lost.
We've always borrowed from our parent culture when creating Jewish music. There's a whole question whether is there really such a thing as Jewish music, because so much of our music is based on the countries where we hail from. But there was a certain kind of folksy ambiance to the music that Shlomo produced that was a product of the 60s, when folk music, when Bob Dylan and Peter, Paul and Mary were out there, and they were creating very important spiritual messages. And some have argued that the neshama of music has somewhat waned today, and it's all about creating pop sounds and electronic reproductions. And it's sort of almost like so overly commercialized that when you watch a music video today, it doesn't have that same kind of supernatural charm that the old music used to have. Do you think there's truth to that?
100%.
I think so, 100%, but it ages us. It tells how old we are, because the young kids love the music today. That's what they're listening to, and that's what they know. For us, we're looking back and thinking those were the days.
I think what's really awesome is when you are with a crowd and somebody sings a niggun and they say, wow, who wrote that niggun? You say, Shlomo wrote it. And they say, no, I've been singing that for like 30 years. I never knew who wrote that niggun.
Yeah.
Right? In one of our recording studios, recording programs with him, we were in the studio. All of a sudden he said, oh, here's a new niggun. And just like that, it popped into his head and he started singing this niggun. And I think we recorded it at that time. I forget which one it was, but it was like, he had this tremendous hush for creating music that not only was beautiful, but it also fit the words.
They say that before he died, he couldn't write the last couple of half a year or so. He couldn't think of a new niggun, and he went to his Rebbe, and he said to his Rebbe, I don't have the words aren't coming to me, the feeling's not coming to me, the music's not coming to me. And the Rebbe hugged him and he says, this is the end of your life. And he died shortly after.
Yeah.
That's chilling. Wow.
Yeah.
Can you give us any unknown stories of Shlomo that gives us an insight into his personality when you were working with him?
Don't tell that one.
I have a great story. I mean, we actually went out with Shlomo one night after a concert in Yerushalayim, and it was 11 o'clock on a Shabbos night. And I said to him, do you want to go out? And he said, yes. And I said to him, let's go to the plaza, Sheraton Plaza, because that was the only place I knew that would be open at 11 o'clock at night back that day, in those days. And he said, no, I don't eat at the plaza. I said, what, kashrus? He says, no. I like to hang out where the thieves and the beggars hang out. And I said, okay, he says, I'll tell you where to go. And he took us to a little restaurant on Agripas, right off the shuk. And the guy was closing the doors. And as soon as he saw Shlomo, his face lit up, and he started the kitchen up again. Come on in. And it was just us.
There were 6 of us.
It was Hansi and Donald Butler from Pittsburgh, and us and Shlomo. And I said to him sitting there, I said, Shlomo, you tell all these stories. They're all great. Tell me the most amazing story. And he said,
we have time for it now?
You have a few minutes?
Yeah.
He said, I'll tell you a story. He says, I don't tell the story because nobody believes it, but I'll tell you the story. He says, I get on a plane. I'm on a plane a lot. I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden the stewardess comes over to me. And she says, I see you're a rabbi. And he said, yes. And she said, I'm a new stewardess, and I just learned about this thing called kosher. And could you explain to me? And he said, well, give her a whole thing that kosher is elevating the mundane act of eating into something holy. And she said, wow. And he said, I'm a rabbi, but I'm also a songwriter. Here's one of my tapes. Here's my card. He used to wear a little vest, and he'd take it out of his vest pocket. And here's my card. And if you ever need anything, call me. And anyway, he gets a letter from her later on saying that she and her roommates, who were all stewardesses, loved his music. So he sent her more music. Fast forward the story a few years, and the stewardess gets on the plane, and she's walking down the aisle, getting everybody seated, and, put your seatbelts on. And she's a couple sitting there, and she hears the guy humming a tune. And she says, wait a second, that's my rabbi's song. He told us the story. It's a fascinating story. And he said, how do you know the song? She says to him. So he said, well, we got married last night. We're going to Hawaii for our honeymoon. And they played this song over and over again, and it's in my head. I can't get it out of my head. And she said, okay, congratulations. And she goes back, and she comes back a minute later and says, I just checked the manifest, and you didn't order kosher. How could you start your life off without eating kosher? You won't have a holy life.
Oh my gosh.
And she says, here is the card of my rabbi. Call him. And Shlomo says they called him later.
No, you forgot. She said, we happen to have 2 extra kosher meals in the back. Would you like them?
So that's
I said,
when
that's where you don't believe the story because they never have
I said,
enough.
Shlomo, we can't believe that happened. Anyway, he says that they called him, their kids were going to do Jewish day school, they became Balei Tshuva, and he says that's the power of a Jewish song. That was the most
Jewish song
amazing.
coming from a non-Jewish flight attendant.
I think it was
Amazing.
actually written up in one of the books about him, you know, that story.
Amazing.
Yeah.
All right. So what I want to do is I want to move on because we only have a limited amount of time. This would make for several hours of discussion. We want to talk about, Fran, your food, and we want to talk about your travels because I think a lot of people may have learned a lot about about how to travel as a Jew with kashrus and Shabbos. Tell us about some of the exotic places that you've been and how you've maneuvered those travels.
Well, basically what we carry with us when we travel is we have an electric pot, like it's like a big pot, and I can cook fish on it, so you can find kosher fish anywhere. So I cook that on it. I use it.
We generally don't stay in hotels. We generally stay in either an Airbnb apartment or a vacation rental apartment. And that way we can maneuver the food issues, which in some places it's impossible. I mean, we went to India. We generally don't travel with groups either, so we travel ourselves. So we go to India, and there's very little to buy that you know is kosher, and very few supermarkets. So it's not conducive for kosher travel. We were in Vietnam, and we actually wanted to go on there's a place in Vietnam called Ha Long Bay, which is just outside of Hanoi.
Beautiful.
It's a magical part of the sea, the ocean, and it has these maybe 1,000 karsts. They're like limestone little mountains that pop out of the water.
They look like fingers. They're very
Mhm.
narrow and
And,
tall.
and the touristy thing to do is to get on a boat, and you go for like a day. You get on
24
at noon, and you come back at noon, and you stay overnight, and you're out on this very calm water in the middle of all these beautiful mountains in the water, and you do some kayaking and so on. But obviously the question is food, right? So there's no kosher little boats. So I in planning our trip, and I do most of the planning ourselves, I reached out to a fella who had a number of these boats, and they have like sleeping accommodations
We were
on the
going
boats.
with your brother.
I was there with my brother and my sister-in-law. So we said, do you have a small boat with 2 bedrooms? So this guy writes back to me and says, yes, I can deal with your request. And I said, can we make it kosher? And he said, what does that mean? I've never heard of that word. So we explained to him, we gave him a quick primer on what kosher is. And we said to him, you know, you can supply fruits and vegetables. You can supply flour and salt and pepper.
Sugar.
And you can call the rabbi, and I gave him the phone number of the rabbi in Ho Chi Minh City, who is the Chabad guy, and ask him which fish is kosher. And you can bring the fish on, and they had 2
We
cooks.
have to bring the
who
fish
were
on live so that we could see.
and we'll
that
check
it
it,
had the fins
right?
and scales.
We'll check it. And so we worked with this guy to create a kosher kitchen on the boat, which was absolutely fascinating.
So it sounds like when you travel, you do reach out to the local Jewish community when you're there.
Always,
And
always.
Chabad is a mainstay everywhere we go.
You couldn't
have
travel without Chabad.
Have you had any disasters in your travels where you thought it was going to go one way and it
No.
didn't as you planned?
No.
I'm glad to hear, because I mean, I'd be petrified to go, without having a tour guide to take me around. But you seem to be fearless in that respect.
We did China and Japan and India all by ourselves, and not for short periods of time, like 2 or 3 weeks at a time.
And tell us about your blog. What if a person wanted to go to travelkosherwithus.blogspot.ca, what would they find there? They would find travel tips.
I
It
basically
started
started.
out as a diary.
Yeah.
we were traveling a lot, and we say, well, did that happen in Vietnam or Thailand? And so every night after we would come back, David would sit down and write this diary, which we sent to our friends, and then we collated it at the end and made it into
And after a while, people were calling us and saying, can you give us advice? We want to go here. And I'd say, just go look at the blog. And I started posting it. And it basically gives you a guide of what we did and where we went. And
the kosher availability there. But there's a caveat also, because that trip was taken in '85, and today it might not be the same in terms of koshers, but that's what it was at that time.
The truth is, travel has gotten somewhat more complicated because you now have issues of automatic lights going off in hallways. You have issue in Japan, for instance.
Door locks.
In Japan, we went ahead and we were going to rent an apartment, and we realized that all the toilets in Japan are electronic, which means when you sit down on the toilet, all of a sudden the seat gets warm, music starts playing. So I actually sent emails out. I sent emails out to people who were renting apartments, and I said, can you tell me whether your apartment has a key, a regular key rather than an electronic key? How far is it from this location, which was the Chabad house, right? Sure. And what kind of toilets do you have? So one of the guys responded to me and he said, can I supply you a plata for Shabbat?
No kidding. Oh, so he was familiar with it.
He was an Israeli fellow who owned a bunch of apartments in Tokyo. His name is Lior. And he knew all about this stuff. It wasn't the first time he was asked the question.
So if a person wants to travel, your blog is a very valuable resource, because it'll share with people some of these contacts that they may wish to get in touch with before they book their travel.
I'll tell you another interesting thing. A lot of people travel and think that milk is kosher around the world. I'm not talking about Chol Yisrael. I'm talking about Chol Stam.
Right.
We had an incident a couple of years ago in India, where we were traveling alone, and we were in this hotel, and we were having our meal shipped to us from Chabad, and we knew that milk was a problem there, and so we took long life milk in packages just for coffee. That's basically what we used it for. And as we finished our meal, the guy who was helping us in terms of the waiter, I guess, he said, would you like to see our cows? This was in a super fancy hotel.
5-star.
Would you like to see our cows? And I said, what do you mean cows? He says, well, all the milk in the hotel was supplied by our cows. I said, where are your cows? And he says, right over there. And he points to a fence like 50 yards away from us. And I said, yeah, I'd like to see your cows. And we walk over, and there's like 15 cows in a shed. And that's how they supply their milk. So I said to him, how do you pasteurize your milk? So he said, we boil it. It's perfectly safe. So now you have a hotel which is serving meat, right? Boiling milk in a pot.
And it's probably not Ben Yomo.
And
it's probably Ben Yomo.
And a lot of people are assuming that milk is not a problem. So there are certain things that you find out as you travel. That
and in addition to that, there's no requirement in a non-Westernized country for the milk to be cow's milk. It can also come from other sources.
We actually saw camel's milk in India.
Right, exactly.
Asked us if we ever had a disaster. Well, I wouldn't consider it a disaster, but it was something.
I'm sorry, just give us a second. Here, okay, sorry about that. Yeah.
When we went to Italy, we came from Israel, and we took with 1 can of tuna from there, because in Italy they had kosher restaurant from Chabad. So we get to Italy, we went downstairs and we said, where's the closest supermarket? We'll buy some fruits and vegetables. We had a can of tuna for today, and we'll worry about tomorrow when we go to the restaurant. And the concierge says, today is Sunday. This is a religious country. No stores are open. Okay, so we had to deal with a can of tuna with an Israeli can opener, and we had no idea how to open, how to use. The next morning, we went down to concierge and said, where's the closest supermarket? And he said,
it's a holiday.
Civic holiday today. None are open. We called Chabad. They were closed for renovation. So it was
literally nothing.
The rabbi from Chabad said, take a train, go into Switzerland, and you can find kosher food there. So we had to leave Italy to go to Switzerland to find kosher food.
Now, this is probably the longest stretch for you that you haven't been traveling because of COVID.
Yeah.
But where is your next destination going to take you? Do you have
Always
plans?
Israel first.
Israel first, and then we'll see. I mean, we like to do South Africa. We haven't done that yet.
And the UAW, the
And Machu Picchu and
the
UAE. The UAE.
Yes. That's, I think, the destination for so many people right now is the Arab
I
Emirates.
will tell you a very fascinating story that we, in planning the trip as we plan a trip, what I do is I always check to see what is Jewish in the country, whatever it is, and I want to see it. So if it's a Jewish person or a Jewish organization or whatever. So going to Japan, we found Chabad in Tokyo and in Kobe, and we were looking for other things that were Jewish. So there's a thing in Japan called the Holocaust Education Center, which is a Holocaust museum in Japan. Now, what's the shaykhus of Japan to the Holocaust?
Sure.
And there was a minister who was a Catholic minister in the 1930s who was out preaching, and he was preaching in China, and he claims that he had a vision, basically a nevuah. And in that vision, it said, I see a state of Israel being formed. I see Jews being gathered from all over the world, and I see Jerusalem being the place of peace, and that Mashiach will come. And those were like the four highlights of his vision. And everybody thought he was a Meshuggah. And then about 10 years later, when Israel was declared, all of a sudden they said, wow, you're a Navi. You know, you thought of the state of Israel. So he loved Israel, this fellow, and his name was, I'm trying to think of his name, Tajeki Otsuki, Reverend. And he bumped into Otto Frank on one of his trips to Israel, to Anne Frank's father. And when he met Anne Frank's father, he was so moved by the story that he said, I'm going to build a Holocaust museum in Japan. And it's in the middle of nowhere. It's a small little place in the middle of nowhere. And so I reached out to them and I said, if I'm already going to Japan, there's two places I have to go to as a Jew. One is the Holocaust Education Center, and the other is the home of Sugihara, who was responsible for the Mir Yeshiva being saved.
That's right. He saved a lot of Jewish lives. Yeah.
Like maybe 60,000 today from the 6,000, right? So we decided that we wanted to go and see the Holocaust Museum. So we sent them an email, and sort of to tantalize them a bit, I said, by the way, we have a connection to Anne Frank because Fran was born in Bergen-Belsen. And instantly we started getting emails back. Oh, we want her to come and talk about her experiences in the Holocaust. And I said, well, she was never in the Holocaust, but we're happy to come and we want to see the museum. And every day they would send us a letter saying, what time are you coming? What date? What time?
And I kept saying, David, it must be a tiny place because somebody has to come there and open the door to let us in. If they want to know a specific time, it must be tiny.
So we show up at the designated time. And there were four fellows standing outside, very beautifully dressed, and they're bowing to us, welcome, and please come in. We have some people who would like to meet you. And so we walk in, and literally there was a room full, maybe 50 people with Israeli flags.
And the men were wearing kippahs.
And as soon as we walked in, they started singing, Hevenu Shalom Aleichem.
A lot of lovers of Israel in Japan, for sure.
And they then asked Fran to light a yahrzeit candle. They asked me to say Kaddish for the 6 million, and they started singing Ani Mamin, which was like a powerful moment. I mean,
I think we have a video.
We have it on video,
on our blog.
But it was like an amazing thing
Is it
that
on the
we
blog?
never expected. Yeah.
Do you ever worry about disease? Do you have to ever get vaccinations before you go on trips?
Yeah. We go to a travel doctor who will tell you, if you're going here, here's what you have to be concerned about. We haven't had to do it in many places. We did it for India. We did it for parts of the Far East. But in general, no.
Nowhere else.
And the other thing is that we're very visibly Jewish because I wear a kippah everywhere. Even though people advise me that I should be wearing a baseball hat, I try to wear a kippah everywhere.
And if people out of that don't know us ask us where we're from, David always says Canada and Israel. Like, let them know that
Yeah. I'll tell you an interesting thing, very interesting thing. The Chabad guy in Kobe, Chabad rabbi there, when he took over the job of being the rabbi of the shul, they said to him, here's a list of all the people in Kobe. Kobe is twin cities with Kobe, Osaka, Kyoto, which is like 25 million people. It's huge. And they gave him a list of like 300, 400 people. And he said, there must be more Jews here than that. So how did he find them? He went every day for a month to Starbucks.
With his wife.
Dressed in his kapata and a black hat with his wife, dressed very tzniustically, and they sat there all day. And he said at the end of the month, he had 1,000 names of Jews.
Wow.
Because people bageled him. They basically said, wow, Rabbi, what are you doing here? And he said, oh, I'm the new rabbi. Pleased to meet you. Give me your name, give me your email address, and come to our Seder. So it was like genius way of reaching out.
And that's an opportunity for all of us to make a Kiddush Hashem. When we go to these very small places, we should be conscious of the fact that we may be actually able to make contact with fellow Jews who are hungry for that contact with Jews. So instead of hiding our Yiddishkeit, we should be proud of it, as you always have been. And that's an inspiration. I want to thank you for this, for spending an hour with us on a Sunday morning. There's so much more that you can share with us about your lives and that you can inspire us with. I want to also acknowledge your kids and grandkids who are on the call today. That they are very, very excited to be able to hear.
Who was that?
I can only imagine. But anyway, if people want to ask you more questions, should they do that through your blog? Is that the best place for them to go?
No, email. If they can read the blog, but it's best if they just send me an email.
What is your email address if anyone has questions?
d.woolf, WOOLF, @rogers.com.
All right. Well, Fran and David, I want to thank you so much for spending an hour with us, and
Thank you.
we're really proud to have you as part of our community, and we look forward to reuniting with you and the rest of the community when COVID is over and we're all vaccinated, and we can start our travels again and learning face to face without the video, and really resuming life as normal and continue to inspire and do great things. You've created a great legacy here in Toronto and beyond, and we're very grateful to you for it.
Can I share? Do we still have a minute or not?
Yeah, sure.
I'll share one more story, which is pretty fascinating story. There's a little town in Switzerland called Schaffhausen, which is just north of Zurich. It's near the airport in Zurich, and it happens to be the site of the largest waterfall in Europe called the Rhinefall, the Rhine River, and there's a waterfall there, and it's a big tourist place. And it also has a little town attached to it, which is intact as it was 1,000 years ago. So the streets are the scape in front of the stores and the apartments look like they're 1,000 years old.
And they're beautiful.
But it's all very gentrified now with fancy stores at the bottom and so on. And we were walking through there, and Fran said to me, sort of like jokingly, wouldn't it be nice if we could sit down in a cafe like all these other people are sitting? And I said, yeah, it would be really nice. Like there's nothing around here, right? I can't imagine there's any Jews here. And all of a sudden we look over our shoulders and there's a guy serving in a restaurant with a kippah and tzitzis hanging out. And I walked over to him and I spoke to him in Hebrew for some reason. He said to me, why are you speaking to me in Hebrew? Why don't you speak to me in English? Because I see you're not Israeli. And I said, who are you? Like, what is this? He said, I live here. I said, how many other Jews are there? He says, none. I said, tell me the story. So he said basically that he met his wife, who was not Jewish, and he wasn't Jewish. Both of them met each other on a student exchange program. And her parents owned this restaurant, and they became involved in Judaism, became Gerim. And when the parents died, they took over the restaurant, and they run this cafe. And I said, well, what about Shabbos? He said, we sell it every Friday. We have a shtar mechira. We sell it every Friday. We have an apartment in Zurich, so we go there for Shabbos. Our kids go to YU. And the fascinating story of a guy living in the middle of nowhere, and he has a bed and breakfast there. I said, is the restaurant kosher? He said, you'd have to trust my hashgacha. He said, I don't have hashgacha. He says, but basically,
And he shows
my
it.
cheese comes from
Rabbi
Manchester.
West.
It's Chol Yisrael, all my cheeses. And he goes through everything. My vegetables are checked. My breads are baked.
And
you
no
know.
one's allowed to turn on the oven except him and his
Him
wife.
and his wife.
Amazing.
So fascinating, in the middle of nowhere. And I said to him, like, how do you do that? I said, aren't you worried walking around with a kippah in Switzerland, anti-Semitism, you're really visible. And he said, look, the people who don't like me aren't going to eat in my restaurant. I don't want them here. He says, the people who do like me will come to my restaurant, and it's a popular spot for Zurich couples to go on shidduch dates because it's 20 miles outside of the city and it's kosher, right? And he says, and the people he says, the 99% of the people have no idea what this is, and they come and they eat. It's a very, very busy coffee house on this main street. And so we've become friends with him, and we've gone there 3 times.
We took our
The last
grandkids
time we had 3 grandchildren with us, and they put on a surprise birthday party for our grandchildren.
All right, so check it out on the blog.
Schaffhausen.
We're gonna. Okay, thank you, David and Fran. Wonderful to see you. God bless you and continue your great work. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you soon for another installment of the people of the Bayit with really interesting stories. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.